Hello, and thank you for logging on to the podcast for the Foundation for Physician Advancement, a nonprofit built by and run by physicians to help other physicians prepare for practicing in today's healthcare environment. I'm Marney Reid, the Executive Director, and we are looking forward to a great discussion today. Today, we'll be discussing how to identify and then look for your ideal job. We're joined by Doctors Michael Ast, Brian Culp, and Ryan Nunley, who represent different practice models, tenures, and geographies. They'll be providing their experience and unique perspective on this task. So, gentlemen, before we get jumping in here, could you please introduce yourself and what practice model you're in?
Thanks, Marnie. I'm Mike Ast from HSS. I work in an academic setting, and I started my career 10 years ago in a private practice setting and made a switch about 5 years in. I work now in a large academic health system in the Northeast.
Yeah, thanks. And my name is Brian Culp. I am in true private practice in New Jersey, and I've been in private practice the entirety of my career.
Thanks, Marnie, and welcome to my other colleagues here. This is Ryan Nunley. I'm at Washington University in St. Louis, a pure academic job, and I'm going to change it up that if I were graduating now and knowing what I know, I would absolutely go into private practice on my own ASC and understanding the business side of medicine, be able to, I think, really work for myself as a boss. But that being what it is, I am at an academic center and work for the big boss.
Well, thank you so much for taking time with us. I would love to just start with Dr. Nunley. And can you describe in your academic model the 4 ways that you find yourself spending the most time?
Yeah, I think, in an academic center, obviously, our mission is a little different than those that are in a private practice, where they're not in the, at least, limelight of trying to educate our future generations. And that's the part of academics I love, is the medical students, the residents, the fellows, teaching them. You have an exciting case, you have a major revision case. It's fun to plan, talk, see them as they develop through their career. So a large majority of my everyday practice is seeing patients and going to the operating room and treating them, but working with the residents and fellows. Second is going to be the research. Obviously, we try and practice the best evidence-based medicine that we have, and sometimes we're intuitive and we have questions ourselves, and it's fun to answer those with our research and try and look at how can we make it better, faster, more efficient, more cost-effective. And then I would say last is interaction with colleagues as we go to meetings and become national and international leaders in terms of
I didn't get that. Could you try?
Thoughts and how do we make this better for not just our community, but the broader community. And then lastly, I think is understanding that medicine is taking care of patients, but also the economics of it. The healthcare systems are at a struggle point with cost and containment and new innovation and technology, and how do we introduce it? And so that's sort of the other big factor in our practice, to take to account new technologies such as robotics and other aspects, but do it in a way that's better for patients and less costly.
Do you think there's ever going to be a time where Siri will interface with medicine because she didn't understand what you were saying, as she so generously provided for us just now? I would love to pivot right over to Dr. Culp, completely switching, from academic over to private practice. And Dr. Culp, you've done an amazing job, staying very relevant in your specialty and being involved in advocacy efforts. Can you tell us the 4 main ways that you spend your life in a private practice setting?
Yeah, the bulk of my time is the running of a practice. I spend 3 days a week in the office setting, seeing patients, providing injections, making phone calls. I spend 2, sometimes 3 days a week in the OR, obviously doing the same kind of surgeries, although I'm not teaching residents and fellows like my colleague Ryan. I'm busy trying to figure out how I can make it go better, faster, and focus on the efficiencies, because I'm not necessarily focusing on those other things. Probably number 3 from a time-consuming standpoint in my practice is running a practice, the administration, interfacing with our billing office, interfacing with new hires and my staff, and figuring out how we're going to move bodies around to make our practice more efficient, as we've got 25 docs in our group. And then, even though I'm in private practice, we still want to having a pulse on the hospital. So I spent a lot of time in committees and in a medical directorship role. So that does consume, I'm still functioning in a medical capacity working with a hospital system. So I still spend a lot of time doing that as well.
So different levels of teaching. Dr. Nunley is teaching the future generations of surgeons, and you're trying to teach the administration, how to synergize best with the care providers. Dr. asked, one of the things I love most about your perspective was you started off in a pure private practice model, actually a stone's throw from where Dr. Culp ended up, and then you got called back to where you did fellowship. So can you talk about the different ways that you spent your time going from, having a very developed private practice back into the academic world, but in still, kind of a private practice type of model?
Yeah, I don't even think it's a stone's throw. Brian's OR was literally right next to mine when we were in Princeton together.
Oh, they were probably stones being thrown.
It was interesting, actually. It's the most fascinating part of the transition was just listening to what Ryan and Brian just said and synthesizing that together. I went into private practice originally because I thought it would give me a lot more free time. I'd have a lot more control of my schedule. I'd be able to sort of just go to work and do my thing and go home. And two things happened. Number one, I personally decided I didn't actually love it that much. I didn't love just going to work and going home. I enjoyed some of the other parts of it, the research, the teaching, the administrative and business side of it, which I'll get into in a second. But also I realized I didn't actually have that much free time between trying to be busy, between building a practice, going out, meeting, referring providers and building relationships and talking to people, between sitting on hospital committees. And I was the managing partner of our practice and our surgery center. So by the time I did all that, I was actually busier than my friends who were in academic teaching facilities. And so when the opportunity came to go back to an academic setting, it didn't actually seem like it would be that much more time commitment, more work, which is exactly what it's turned out to be. I work about the same amount of time. I just do different things now. The practice I have today is very unique. And you've all heard me say this before, but I can't stand the term privatedemics just because it has no meaning, because every one of these private practice type jobs in academic settings are completely different. But I do work in a completely private practice in an academic setting. So I'm an independent solo private practice practicing at our hospital with academic research and teaching affiliations and leadership roles within the organization that are also part of my job. And so it is sort of a blend of, I still have to do what Brian is doing, where I have to run my own practice, have my staff administrate that, but I get to teach residents and fellows. I get to do research. I've got the resources to do that. And I've got some financial incentive to do it as well.
Wonderful. And, one of the things I think, hindsight is beautiful, right? It's an amazing thing that we just don't have when we're making the decisions that we're about to make. So going back to Dr. Nunley, what were some of the things that were very different that you thought you were getting into going to academics, whether it's good or bad, or just you didn't realize it, that you find is very prevalent in your practice model?
Well, I think the biggest thing, and we've heard the word independence thrown out here a few times, I'm beholden to the mega system, and that is my block OR time, my schedule, who we hire, can we fire a medical assistant, a nurse that's not performing well, not recognizing the fact that a lot of those decisions are taken out of my hands. And perfect example, if I have an add-on case that comes in through my clinic that needs a washout or needs something urgently, and I add it on to the OR, I'm routinely doing those cases at 2-3 o'clock in the morning because they have a full OR schedule. There's so many people looking for block time. There's not enough people to be able to anesthesia or other providers, versus a private practice model where, if you want to add something on tomorrow or you want to move your schedule around, it adds flexibility. And I would agree with my colleagues that it comes at a price, right? I don't serve on a whole lot of hospital committees because I'm being pulled in terms of fellowship and resident training and other things. But, I think it is some of that lost in the mix of being in a big system that can be frustrating at times, but can also be rewarding when you have residents and fellows who are the first line for call. So I don't have to go to the emergency room because they're already teed up. If a patient comes in that's seen by the resident or the fellow, if it needs surgery, they call me when they are rolling back to the room. So it gives me some freedom and independence there. So I think it comes with a plus and a minus. And to any person listening to this, I think you have to recognize what your your albatross is and what things you enjoy. If you enjoy working to try and make the system better in committees, great. If you are somebody who hates working with the system and wants to have the independence to be able to do things on your time and your schedule with your staff, then I think you have to recognize those things that make you happy or unhappy and be able to tailor your practice around it.
I'm not sure.
Wonderful. You have a quite active Siri. I love how engaged she is. I wish half of our
Siri
attendees
never talks to me, but all of a sudden it's like wants to chat tonight.
To all of the attendees that are listening to this in preparation to, come into a live one, please emulate Dr. Nunley's Siri app and chime in, even when not appropriate. I would love to just punt this right over to Dr. Ast. Speaking of being beholden onto the rules of others, we recently this year learned that Dr. Ast is not allowed to wear jeans to a conference where he's faculty. Dr. Ast, what things did you learn that you didn't really anticipate when going into your practice model?
I mean, in my first practice model, I kind of alluded to it earlier. I didn't realize, just like Brian said, I didn't realize exactly how much other work there was when you try to actually start running a practice. What was actually fascinating was when I came back into a more sort of academic facility, I found it actually wasn't that much different. In my particular job, and this is why all these jobs are so different from each other, I actually have a pretty huge amount of flexibility, right? I can take days off when I want. I can see patients when I want. If I can get block time, I can operate when I want. And so there actually, in some of these, sort of depends on the different opportunities. Some of them you have a lot of flexibility and some of them you don't. I appreciate now that I don't take trauma call anymore. Obviously, taking trauma call is a really important way to build your practice early on. And I took a lot of it in my first couple of years in private practice. I don't anymore. Like Ryan said, I've got residents and fellows, and how nice that is really nice. And it's also nice that I'm home every weekend with my family. So I think a lot of these decisions, you just have to learn about the details. And some of it, like you said, it's hindsight, right? Some of it you don't realize until you're there, or sometimes you don't realize what your albatross, to use Ryan's term, is until you start living it. And you're like, man, so many of us go through residency. I can't wait to teach. I'm so excited to teach. And then the first day you do a case with a resident, you decide you never want to operate again. Like, it's just the worst experience of your life. And you have a terrible time giving up any control or watching someone else do something in a way that might be different than how you wanted to do it. And you just decide you don't want to teach anymore. Sometimes you have to have that experience in order to know what you like and what you don't. So while it would be great to say we can sort of you can figure everything out up front, one of the reasons a lot of people change jobs in a non-negative way is that they simply realize that what they thought they liked isn't really what they like, and they like something different. And I think that that's okay.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I love listening to you and to people like Dr. Sheth and Dr. Chen talk about, making that transition is really out of the opportunity that came along, and then just truly getting to know yourself better. And along the thread of getting to know yourself better and maybe even thinking about yourself before this, Dr. Culp, I love the story about how you came about to picking your practice model, because going in, you thought you were going to go to something different. Can you talk about the things that a surgeon and their significant other should sit down before they, start going on interviews or before they sign a contract, and really figure out about themselves and what they want their life to look like before, going forward and making that decision?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know that, as Dr. Ash just pointed out, sometimes you don't realize you don't want to do something until you get there and you're starting to do it. And I think, I thought I was being raised in the land of academia, that I wanted to be in academics, and I came to a little bit of a rude awakening in the course of my fellowship to maybe realize I, as Mike said, I don't want to give up that control. And so I think the key step for me, and maybe the best advice I can give, is to spend some time with yourself, being introspective, whether that's alone or with your spouse or with a good mentor. One of my mentors at Rush said, you can only pick 3 things. You can't have 5 things. You can't have 10 things. You pick 3 things, and you gotta prioritize those 3 things. So if it's going to be lifestyle or money or teaching or fame or whatever you think you want, you better know what you want, so that when you get there, you're not dissatisfied. And I think taking pause to go through that exercise, and that's what steered me in the direction of private practice. Autonomy was one of the top items for me. And I remember going on an interview for an academic job, and they said, if you request time off, you're almost always going to get it. And that's so different than my model, where, like, I'm off whenever. It's the only person who loses when I take off is my own practice. So I very rarely take off, which is almost the catch-22. But it's all my decision. And I remember that sense of loss of autonomy. And I was like, hey, I don't think I can tolerate that. And the same thing as Mike Gass mentioned, like when you're giving up the saw to someone, do you like that feeling or do you dislike that feeling? And I remember thinking I liked that feeling and then not enjoying it when I saw a junior resident in the operating room with me doing something that I was a little uncomfortable with as a fellow. So I think the reality is it's the pause, the introspection, and really figuring yourself out before you go down that road that's so critical.
I love those stories. And especially too, I think, from hearing, Dr. Ast and others talk about, changing that job, it's really how you handle it and the lessons you take forward, because you can't get to better without making mistakes. And so, you can never look at those things as a failure. Just don't burn bridges. Thank you again to our amazing faculty and to the listeners that took time out of your busy lives to really help prepare for that next step going into practice. We thank you as well. If you want to learn a little bit more about our mission and upcoming events, please visit us at buildingasuccessfulpractice.org.